Hello, I'm Andy Samways, Director of Unity Research School. It's an absolute privilege to be here as part of the Research Ed Norwich 2020 lineup. We obviously can't be together in person, but hopefully this recording provides an insight into some of the work that actually we've been working on as a research school as part of the EEF Research School Network for the last 3 years. I'm going to be drawing on evidence from the Making Best Use of TAs guidance report. It's been one of the key pieces that we've been supporting school training with across the region and wider. In the sense it looks at the strategic deployment of TAs to support effective learning. So today I'm looking to isolate one particular element of it, the TA scaffolding framework. It's something that has huge potential, I feel, at the current context in the situation we're in. So, promoting independence through least help first. Utilising the TA scaffolding framework for effective interaction in the context of physically distanced classrooms. That's what I'm aiming to try to outline. I'm going to provide a context, going to explore the evidence, and then finally outline the scaffolding framework. And I hope, if you stick with it, you'll walk away with a framework that is a takeaway that for use for teachers and TAs right now that could hopefully sit on the desk and inform planning of people in the context that's challenging we're in at the moment. I'm no YouTube star. This is taking some time to record, obviously, but hopefully what I'll be able to do is narrate you through some of the evidence behind the context and also the scaffolding framework itself. I'm going to be here in person on the video screen for the first few slides. Then I'm going to disappear. There's some mixed evidence, isn't there, around whether having the thumbnail there actually helps or hinders. So I'm going to disappear for the middle bit and then connect again at the end. So I hope that works for you. So, since March the 23rd, there's been a completely new context for teaching. As we stand in June at the moment, just 7% of children are in school. The vast majority of teaching is happening remotely. Schools have supported increasing numbers of key workers and then increasing extensions of reception year 1 and year 6 in primary schools. Secondary schools, year 10 and 12, open as we speak. But this is certainly challenging, isn't it? We know that. It's been relentless. The speed at which teachers, schools, trusts, organisations have had to adapt and become agile. The collaborations that have formed and also the sense of where we've been finding the strength to plan for effective teaching. But in the context of the home, the teaching now for 93% of the population is at home. Hopefully supported by families, but we certainly know that those from most disadvantaged backgrounds have not been having this idyllic setting here. There's a new context for learning. Independence has been a key part that's been pushed into the limelight. Children are working alongside their parents, but those parents themselves are in a situation where they're no doubt having to either work from home, try to balance their own conflicting demands of emotional, social, economic issues that they're having. So this sense of self-regulation, the sense of actually being able to be an independent learner, has never been so much at the fore. We're going to draw on aspects of the Metacognition guidance report from the EEF, which since published in 2018 has certainly been providing a narrative around the importance of developing metacognition and self-regulation. So this new context for learning is something that we're going to explore. Because right now we're educating the classrooms that look very different to that which we were used to beforehand. The normal routines, rhythms, habits have changed. They're changing by the day. The physical distancing required within social distancing regulations inhibits certain activities that we've been used to, don't they? So actual habits of teachers are having to be redesigned. That's challenging for everybody. Even the most experienced teachers will find that what they were intuitively developing has had to change again. So we're educating in classrooms that look very different, that feel very different, and to all intents and purposes are very different. But at the heart of it, it's the children, and that's what we're looking to secure and develop. As Alex Quigley says, the sense of weebles wobble but they don't fall down. I'm showing my age there. But that sense of the system is bouncing back, it always has done, it always will. Laura Crow's talks about the ordinary magic of schools. In that sense of what we're doing is rebooting, we're re-enabling education to develop, to flourish, to grow in the most challenging circumstances. So compared with what we knew, cast your minds back to those classrooms that we were all so used to, thriving in, developing in, experimenting in. That sense of a community of often 30 children, moving around, dynamic, teacher able to move around, often alongside children, working alongside individuals in small groups. All that has changed, hasn't it? Hopefully temporarily, but at the meantime, it's for a sustained period of time. And those interactions we shared are different. They're going to be different. So what we're looking at here is reimagining teaching. This is where evidence comes alongside right now, because evidence supports experience. It provides best bets at best. We have no experience of, well, prior experience of educating through a pandemic. Therefore, we're in uncharted territory. The experience we're growing, but the evidence can be brought alongside from different places. Either evidence from pre-existing educational research, or evidence that's actually emerging evidence from different countries, different organisations. So bringing that evidence alongside experience is something that right now we can hopefully use to make even better judgments, even better decisions. And what I'm going to share here is a sense of a very small part of that, the sense of a scaffolding framework that hopefully can add into the reimagining of classroom routines. Not just for TAs, but for teachers. At its heart, it's a simple tool, but hopefully it's a simple tool that can be just one part of the toolkit that actually then supports teachers developing practices that are subtly different and nuanced to that which they were used to before. In their valuable book, Making Every Lesson Count, Sean Allison and Andy Tharby go to point out that the ultimate goal of their work and our work as teachers is to lead students towards independence. They go on to say that the idea of independent learning is often misunderstood. Independence is a desirable outcome of teaching, not a teaching strategy in its own right. Our job is to teach children rather than to cross our fingers in the hope they will learn on their own. That certainly resonates, doesn't it, in the current context? As does the sense that learning is highly complex. They go on to talk about how it ebbs and flows through lessons, across schemes of work and over years. Some learning cycles are simple, quick and over in minutes. Others are much longer, covering 2, 3 or more lessons, these loops covering this time. Others still are choppy and messy, they quote, returning back to teacher explanation and modelling repeatedly as students struggle to refine new knowledge and skill through lots of practiced and focused feedback. The art and the craft of the teacher going alongside individuals, small groups, balancing whole class exposition. Underpinning all of that, the desire and the focus to challenge, to guide next steps and to instruct. The well-practiced habits, routines and norms that we've developed are all having to be questioned. How we ask questions, how we give feedback, explaining, modelling, correcting, all of that in the context of a physically spaced classroom is subtly but undeniably different. Add on to this the remote learning that teachers are needing to support, and the complex matter gets even more demanding. When we can't even be in the same classroom as those pupils, we've had to find ways to instruct, practice, inspire and support children. More than ever, we're having to consider what teaching from the front looks like, how distance can be maintained, how bubbles can be supported. All of this absolutely requiring greater independence of the children in our schools. Therefore, reimagining teaching surely must make sure that whatever we do, we prioritise developing pupil independence. To this end, we can certainly utilise the evidence that's been constant and growing. The Education Endowment Foundation, in their Teaching Learning Toolkit, rate metacognition and self-regulation as having high impact for very low cost, based on extensive evidence. Metacognition and self-regulation approaches aim to help pupils think about their own learning more explicitly, often by teaching them specific strategies for planning, monitoring, and evaluating their learning. Interventions are usually designed to give pupils a repertoire of strategies to choose from and the skills to select the most suitable strategy for a given learning task. Self-regulated learning can be broken into 3 essential components, as we'll explore later. Metacognition and self-regulation have consistently high levels of impact, with pupils making an average of 7 months additional progress. The evidence indicates that teaching these strategies can be particularly effective for those for low prior attaining and also older pupils. A key evidence source is the EEF Guidance Report, a synthesis produced in 2018 from the Education Endowment Foundation. Their work clearly highlights 7 recommendations. Those recommendations are clearly outlined in the guidance report freely available from the EEF website. Self-regulated learning, as we've said, can be broken into 3 essential components that teachers need to know about to help their pupils to develop into successful learners. Cognition is the mental process involved in knowing, understanding, and learning. In cognitive strategies, it's skills like memorization techniques or subject-specific strategies, like making different marks with a brush or using different methods to solve equations in maths. This is the bread and butter of good teaching. Cognitive strategies are fundamental to acquiring knowledge and completing learning tasks. A second key feature is motivation, about the willingness to engage our metacognitive and cognitive skills and apply them to learning. Motivational strategies will include convincing oneself to undertake a tricky revision task now, affecting our current well-being, as a way of improving our future well-being in the test tomorrow. Finally, metacognition itself is about the ways learners monitor and purposefully direct their learning. For example, having decided that a particular cognitive strategy for memorization is likely to be successful, a pupil then monitors whether it has indeed been successful and then deliberately changes or not their memorization method based on that evidence. By metacognitive strategies, we're talking about strategies we use to monitor or control our cognition, such as checking that our memorization technique was accurate, or selecting the most appropriate cognitive strategy for the task we're undertaking. Self-regulated learners are aware of their strengths and weaknesses and can motivate themselves to engage in and improve their learning. Clearly, that is an absolute ambition we should be striving for. At the heart of this is metacognition. As a learner, we approach any learning task or opportunity with some metacognitive knowledge. Firstly, of our own abilities and attitudes, knowledge of ourselves as a learner. Then, hopefully, what strategies are effective and available, knowledge of strategies. And finally, knowledge of the task itself. When undertaking a learning task, we start with this knowledge, then apply it and adapt it. This is metacognitive regulation. It is about planning how to undertake a task, working on it while monitoring the strategy to check progress, then evaluating the overall success. The diagram here represents a metacognitive regulation cycle. This is not a one-off process of discrete steps, but an ever ongoing cycle. As you progress through the task, applying your metacognitive and cognitive skills, you update your metacognitive knowledge of yourself, strategies and tasks, as well as updating your subject knowledge and skills. Working alongside the team of the Education Endowment Foundation, Oliver Caviglioli created this model that we can use as a core for considering metacognition. The metacognitive knowledge we've just mentioned, the knowledge of task, knowledge of strategies, and knowledge of self are clearly crucial for learners to develop, as are the bottom box elements, the metacognitive regulation, the skills of planning, monitoring, and evaluation. The cycle of plan, monitor, evaluate, and the different aspects of the metacognitive knowledge are so crucial. Teachers should really be considering these even more than ever when setting learning tasks and supporting pupils to complete them. In our current context, this is ever more crucial, with a need to support children's learning in a remote nature. It's sure to be blended for some time yet, isn't it? This is when the children most need the support, when they're not even with the teacher. It provides a safety net and a springboard to learning. The safety net understanding the sense of, okay, I need to plan. How can I monitor? And the springboard thinking, well, how did I do well in things? How can I actually do even better? As a model, it's a really strong way to just visualize what are the key elements that we're trying to do. Another very helpful model that I've found useful to bring alongside the EEF model is this from James Mannion. He talks about metacognition as being monitoring and controlling what's in your head, your thought processes, with the sense that getting to self-regulated learning, the application of metacognition and self-regulation to learning. The key addition here, I feel, is the sense of self-regulation, monitoring and controlling how you interact with your environment through emotions and behaviour. In this current context, self-regulation is something we're having to do remotely to support families, and increasingly, as we extend school opening, support children in a new context of self-regulation in socially distanced or spaced classrooms. So I find this particularly useful. As with all models, he says, it's a simplified version of reality. In particular, there are a number of additional factors that influence the extent to which a student or pupil is able or willing to regulate their own learning. These include things like motivation, to what extent they're motivated, and is it intrinsic or extrinsic. The EEF recognise that in their model. Autonomy, do they have any choice about whether or how to engage in their learning? Or are there expectations imposed by the teacher or a looming deadline? Self-efficacy, to what extent do they believe they can learn effectively within this domain? And so on. As ever, context is king. It recognises the importance of social emotional regulation, which is especially important, especially with those in early childhood. As we consider any type of scaffolding, we need to be aware that children are also going to see the world very differently and therefore have to learn differently. What works for one may not work for another person. Sweller's seminal work, Cognitive Load During Problem Solving, Effects on Learning, really highlights the extensive research on expert-novice distinctions and how they lie at the basis of learning. Experts and novices differ in their memory of problem state configurations, their problem-solving strategies, and how they approach categorizing problems. He goes on to underpin that acquiring or learning a procedure to solve a problem is not the same as being able to solve the problem. The former is a type of knowledge, the latter is a skill. That problem solving is something that scaffolding seeks to address. The second point, while solving problems might lead to solving a problem in the short term, it doesn't lead to learning how to solve problems in the long term. Supporting independent learning has to enable young pupils, students, to actually develop the clarity of their thinking, of their thought processes. And so then to scaffolding, just one part of the repertoire that teachers effectively can utilise in their classrooms to support metacognition. Scaffolding is a term which is regularly used in educational discussions, but it's not often explained by those who get to use it. Is it help? Is it support? Is it differentiation? It's a term that gets used in different ways by different people, so let's try and be clear about what we're talking about. Scaffolding was a term first used in education by Wood, Bruner and Ross in 1976 to describe the way an adult can provide tuition to a pupil who is learning a new skill or concept. Scaffolding describes the ways adults provide structured help so the pupil can reach a specified goal. Scaffolding is not about modifying the task, but simplifying what the pupil has to do in order to carry it out. So the adult allows the pupil to attempt each part of the task by herself, but provides structured help for the parts that she finds difficult. As the pupil becomes more skilled, she should be given more parts of the task to perform, until she can eventually perform all aspects independently. The bullet points here represent some of the findings of that paper. That scaffolding is actually a form of differentiation, that pupils from different levels need different ways of guidance when solving a problem. And a key part about with scaffolding you offer the right support. Support that's just above the level of the pupil. This helps you reach a higher level for the student. That sense of desirable difficulties is a crucial element underpinning that which we're doing here, isn't it? Before we move on to the scaffolding framework itself, just take a moment to reflect on how you have utilised scaffolding in your current practices. Where has it been most successful? Where has it been most challenging? What actually might be useful to consider and reflect on now as you're moving into this considerable time of change? Having provided a context, signposted to some of the evidence that I feel supports the thinking in this aspect, now onto the final section of outlining the scaffolding framework itself. We've been really lucky and fortunate to work alongside Professor Rob Webster from UCL. Him and his team have been the key people in exploring making best use of teaching assistants, having it trialled at the moment through the EEF trial, Maximise the Impact of TAs. They're really helpful publications, these two books here, Maximise the Impact of Teaching Assistants, that guidance for school leaders and teachers, and then the Teaching Assistants Guide to Effective Interaction, actually are really valuable resources that we've found convey so many useful evidence-informed practices within the context of primary, secondary and special school education. Alongside the EEF guidance report, Making Best Use of Teaching Assistants, 3 documents here that align to make the best use of how we interact with our pupils. Within the Teaching Assistants Guide to Effective Interaction, the summary that Webster, Radford and Bosanquet share just highlights that scaffolding happens only through interaction. It happens in the moment in response to what the pupil has just said or done, is informed by careful observation, diagnostic questioning and asking the pupil to talk aloud as they work. It's defined by giving the least amount of support and consistently ensuring that the pupil takes as much responsibility for the task as they can. And here we go at arriving at least help first. It's a mantra of one of the key recommendations in the EEF guidance report. Least help first is the key part in supporting the development of independent learning through self-regulation. So to the scaffolding framework itself. Freely available within the Education Endowment Foundation's guidance report, Making Best Use of TAs. Derived from Bosanquet, Radford and Webster, the Teaching Assistants Guide to Effective Interaction. I'll make sure you have a link later on in this presentation so you can easily access a one-side summary. Essentially, it shows that at the top of the framework is self-scaffolding, which offers the highest level of pupil independence. At the bottom of the framework is correcting, which offers no pupil independence because the adult is doing all the work. Initially designed and scoped for supporting teaching assistant pupil interactions, this framework absolutely underpins effective teaching and the sense that teachers using the least help first mantra as well are key within supporting self-regulation and self-regulated learning through the use of metacognition in their classrooms. Such a scaffold sits within classroom practice. Within the EEF Guidance Report on Metacognition and Self-Regulated Learning, Recommendation 3 recommends that teachers model your own thinking to help pupils develop their metacognitive and cognitive skills. Scaffolded tasks, like worked examples is what as they say here, allows pupils to develop their metacognitive and cognitive skills without placing too many demands on their mental resources. There's some evidence, at least in terms of metacognition, that scaffolding should not be too specific as it may inhibit reflection. Some deliberate difficulty is required so that pupils have gaps where they have to think for themselves and monitor their learning with increasing independence. This clearly arises out of the work of Bjork and Bjork in 2011 in their paper Making Things Hard on Yourself but in a Good Way. Creating desirable difficulties to enhance learning is absolutely something that scaffolding should support. In response to the COVID-19 pandemic, the Education Endowment Foundation teams have been supporting resource for teachers. This one includes the home learning approaches, a planning framework which has drawn immensely from the Metacognition Guidance Report. Metacognitive strategies will be particularly important to pupils if they can't be with teachers right now in the classroom. This framework is for a learning sequence and is unlikely to take place within one single lesson or one single instruction. But I want to just link on to the top here, the sense about activate. Being intentionally metacognitive is what I'm suggesting. How can we be actually activating the thinking such that prompting pupils to think about what they have learnt previously and how that's going to help them with their next steps? Why include it? Well, it's an important aspect of metacognition is planning how you'll approach a task using what you already know. This can be really useful in terms of understanding the gaps that are emerging from disruption to education as well. So by being intentionally metacognitive, using this scaffolding framework should hopefully be something that actually adds capacity to teachers' understanding of where pupils are. In finally teeing up our scaffolding framework, back to that core model I mentioned earlier on. What we're really trying to do is to develop a knowledge of strategies and a knowledge of self for pupils. But the sense is that knowledge of strategies about what they can be using in their planning of how to approach a problem. What they can be doing as they monitor themselves going through that. And then at the end, okay, what did actually work and what worked well for me? What would I do differently next time? Honing in on the scaffolding framework. On the right hand side, you start to see how as you go up from correcting through modelling, cluing, prompting and scaffolding, we're seeing a greater level of pupil independence. The ability of that pupil to sort themselves out, to find ways through a problem, to not give up. On the right hand side, in opposition to that, as you go from self-scaffolding through to correcting, you're basically essentially seeing more help from a TA, a teacher or an adult. Let's break down each of the sections, starting with self-scaffolding. A pupil who is able to self-scaffold is an independent learner. Self-scaffolding can also be called self-regulated learning, and this is surely the aim for all pupils. Pupils able to self-scaffold can plan how to approach a task, monitor how they're doing during the task, and evaluate and review the success of the task and how they approached it. The key to a good strategy within self-scaffolding is it's a relatively general level, so it can be applied to similar situations. Things like approaches like putting items in an order of a list of importance, grouping items, drafting the content of something, making a list of the vocabulary needed maybe. How about looking at a previous example of something that you've experienced success with, or even asking peers, for example. It's worth noting too that the strategies mentioned there can form the basis of prompts and clues that you could use later on in the scaffolding framework as we move towards independence. Prompting represents the first level of adult intervention, when a pupil is unable to self-scaffold their way to achieve their goal. Providing a prompt means saying or doing something to encourage that pupil to draw on their own knowledge of what to do when they do not know what they will need to do. Webster and Co. provide a sense that the reason that some pupils cannot or do not self-scaffold is because they cannot understand or do the task. It has happened to us all at some point in our school career, and very often more than once. Most of us will recall a task where we just could not understand what the teacher was explaining. For some pupils, the first reaction to being presented with a new concept or complex information can be confusion or even mild panic. This, of course, impedes their ability to think clearly. It's important to remember that because the task has been planned to be written within the zone of proximal development, the starting point will have some basis in their prior knowledge, even if it is not clear to them at first what that prior knowledge is. That's where we come in. It can take some time for pupils to realise that there are elements of the task that are similar to something they have done before, and this information might need to be teased out. Therefore, if a pupil is unable to self-scaffold, we can move to the next step of the framework and intervene. Such prompts are an action, something you might say, a gesture you might give, that's designed to encourage the pupil to draw on their prior learning. There are three types of useful prompts: saying nothing, verbal prompts, and a gesture. In saying nothing, we're thinking about that coaching approach, aren't we? Letting silence do the hard work. In saying something, we might say something like, "What do you need to do first? What's your plan?" Cluing. If a pupil has been unable to self-scaffold and the prompts you've given have not helped, you need to move to the third layer of the scaffolding framework, cluing. Cluing is trickier than prompting, as it is more reactive. Providing clues requires fairly quick decisions about interactions in the moment. A common set of prompts can be developed over time, which can be applied in a range of situations displayed around the walls, irrespective of which subject or task it relates to. As clues are specific to the task, the clues you provide will depend on which part the pupil is finding difficult and the level of their knowledge and understanding about the task. A good way to word a clue is as a question, the answer to which contains a key piece of information that will help the pupil. Examples might be, what did the teacher do before they started writing? Modelling. If your prompts and clues have not been successful in helping a pupil to move on, you'll need to model part of the task. Modelling is the fourth tier of the interaction framework. When a skill or strategy is completely new to a pupil, it's helpful to have it modelled by someone who's confident in this area, an expert. A model demonstrates how to do the part of the task the pupil isn't able to do. There are many different ways of modelling, but they all involve showing the pupil what to do in easy replicable steps. Modelling is incredibly powerful, and from the front, in the context of where we are in distance classrooms, stands to be a key technique. However, crucial is making sure that pupils understand that the teacher will model, we'll then go through it together, and then they will have a go themselves, the I, we, you approach. Talking through an approach. drafting on the whiteboard the approach, using a visualizer to actually unpick and show the pupils what you'll do. There are many ways that modelling is becoming a very, very clear use of teacher time in exposition and instruction. Correcting. Correcting is simply providing the right answer or completing the task for the child. This requires no independent thinking on the part of the child. There is a place for making sure that knowledge is correct, but as an approach to scaffolding their own self-regulation, it should be strenuously avoided. Once a child knows that an adult is going to correct their work for them at the first occasion, they will outsource their learning. They won't develop the resilience with which to find their own solutions. So it really sits at the bottom here of this framework for least help first. I hope that walkthrough of the framework has been useful, as well as providing the sense of the context for this particular framework right now, and the evidence that can also underpin many of the thinkings about this self-regulation, the self-motivation, and also the metacognition that are so crucial within this model. You can download this handy summary sheet from the Education Endowment Foundation website. Head to their practical tools section, select the guidance reports, and in there find Making Best Use of Teaching Assistants. There you'll find the guidance report itself, a summary, an online course, as well as the additional tools and resources. That's where you'll find the scaffolding framework. We've used it extensively in our training programs. We know schools have used it as a focus for dialogue, a focus for professional development, for teachers and TAs, as they seek to really establish the conditions where least help first actually really pushes on the abilities of children in their scaffolding for themselves. And right now, with such uncertainty about schooling in the sense of what we knew it as, surely we should really be making sure that we're doing everything we can to support self-regulation and metacognition in the students and children that we work with. So I hope you found that useful, and that if there's any other elements that you can see use for, you can able to take them from here. In terms of contact, from going forward, please don't hesitate to contact us at Unity Research School. You can follow us on Twitter at UnityResSc. My name, Andy Samways, my email address here, asamways@unitysp.co.uk. And should you wish to, please do follow me on Twitter at SBTATeach. Thank you for your time, and I really hope that the session today has been of value to you. It's added value. It's not telling you what to do. I'm not telling you how to teach. It's bringing alongside the experience you bring a tool that has evidence-informed aspects behind it. Thank you, and I really wish you a good day and look forward to hearing from you should you wish to discuss it further. Thank you very much and take care. Bye-bye.